evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss, host of the program here. It comes on at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3, and we're here every Monday at allpointstv.com. We bring a program on every week for an hour, and then on the second and fourth Mondays of each month, we are the program that precedes Sartorius Black History Corner. I want to definitely acknowledge that program that comes on at 3:30, and it hangs around to about 4 o'clock. 30 minutes usually is the norm for that program, and they do a very good job every second and fourth Mondays. We're here every Monday, and we're here without exception. We try to come to the studio about an hour before we have to go on the air. That way we can have a discussion about how we're going to approach the program, so we can bring you the best quality we can. We know that you are spending your time with us, and we respect that, and we have to try to do the best job we can do. Anytime we fall short of that, it's because it's John's fault. It's not my fault. No, seriously, we do the best job we can do, and we look forward to hearing from you as far as how you feel of the job we're doing, and make any suggestions that you feel necessary. You can't hurt our feelings. We know there's a lot of room for improvement, and so anything you can say that will suggest how we can approach it differently, we're willing to listen to any of those comments, because we know we can get better.
Maybe we could do something like a PBS fundraising drive. Just have people on for like 24 hours, do like a marathon.
Do a fundraiser, and and hopefully we could. Get some, we don't need any more cameras. I was going to say we could buy some more cameras, but that's when we first got started. When I first got started 7 years ago, I keep saying this over and over again on the program, but when I first got started 7.5 years ago, a person would come in here, we'd do some interviews, and at the end of the interview, I would say, well, look into the camera and say anything you want to say to the viewers as they close out the program. And they would say, look into the camera. There's a camera in here? And we didn't have these big cameras we have here right now. We had cameras all over the place. But at that time, and then we had some that we got on the side because we don't have enough room for every one that we have. But at that time, they would be surprised there was a camera in the room, because we'd have that small camera. And they thought they were just talking like it was a radio format. You could see it, you could hear it, but you couldn't see it. But they didn't see that small camera. Now they come in here and they get walk in the door. You're being blocked by cameras. So we've grown a lot since that time, and we have a lot more room for more growth. And we know that you'll be along for the ride, and feel free to give your input, because we welcome anything that can help us improve what we do here. We try to bring something different every Monday. And I want to tell you again what I've been telling you over the course of the last several months or so during this campaign. I mean, we're trying to get Donald. I'm going to just be up front and tell you, we're trying to get Donald Trump elected President of the United States. Because I just recognize how late the hour is, and there's no sense me beating around the bush. I'm an advocate of something different, even if I don't know all of the particulars of what that difference will be. But then again, we don't know what the differences will be when any of these persons get elected to office. And we know what they say in their campaign, but how much of that has been borne out by what they do once they get in office. So I don't know what the tomorrow may bring. What's that song by Rance Allen? It may be sunshine, it may be rain. But I do know, after all, we're going to make it after all. That's a song he put out. And I can echo those words. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know that we have not had sunshine brought to us in the past by what these politicians have been doing to this country. And if we don't get off this road, if we don't get off this track we're on right now, and we don't get off of it soon, then I think that, and I hate to say this, but I think it's true, then we can hang it up, because we are now at the very edges of that cliff. We keep talking about going over the cliff. We are almost at the very edge of that cliff right now, and we can't take much more of what we're getting. And we've been getting a lot of it as of late. But this journey that we're on right now started around, I would date it really with Theodore Roosevelt, who was this nation's first progressive president. And I would date it with Theodore Roosevelt, who took over from William McKinley, who was assassinated in 1901, and Theodore Roosevelt, the vice president, took over the assumption of his office, serving almost all of the second term because McKinley was shot and assassinated at the beginning of his second term, having been elected the first time in 1896, and elected again in 1900, but did not serve any length of time during the second term. And then Roosevelt came in and brought us this progressive administration. He brought into the political landscape from the nation's capital, and was the first progressive president this country had. And we've had a series of them in the aftermath of that journey. Interim period between 1908, since Roosevelt ran for another term, in 1904, but respected the two-term precedent, since he served almost all of McKinley's second term. He did not run for what would have been a third term, although he would have been elected to a second term. He had run again in 1908, but decided to respect the two-term precedent and did not run again, but was dissatisfied with the Republican predecessor, who was William Howard Taft, and being dissatisfied with Taft, who was in office from 1909 to 1913, in my view, a quintessential mistake in terms of splitting the Republican Party, and by doing that, running on the Bull Moose Party really was a progressive party in 1912, and that split as a Republican running as a third party figure, and then being the former president, took a lot of votes away from William Howard Taft, and we got in here a person that was worse than Roosevelt, and that person was Woodrow Wilson, who was progressive in his own right, and took the progressive movement, really started under Roosevelt, took that from the Republican Party and then put it on steroids in the Democratic Party, and now what we have is progressivism on steroids. But we cannot eliminate history and say that it has all been on the shoulders of the Democratic Party, because the launching pad for it was in the Republican Party, and that's something that many of the pundits do not speak to. But that's as true as it is true also that the Great Depression, which was turned into a Great Depression by politicians, it would have been what it had been in the past if they did not get involved in it. But it was just like what they said about Garfield. Garfield would have survived his wounds that he had suffered after being elected in 1880. He would have survived his wounds, but one thing happened. The doctor showed up. And once they showed up, then the doom was certain. If you understand what medicine was back in that time period, where it wasn't too much more than it was during the time of George Washington, where they would put leeches on you and just bleed you, and we call it bloodletting, which they thought if they sucked enough blood out of the person, they'd be sucking the poison out. And it wasn't too much more advanced than that than it was during the time of Garfield, who was assassinated in 1881. And when he was assassinated, I think he could have survived his wounds, but the doctor showed up. And I'm just making the point that whenever the politicians show up, look out. And so Roosevelt's progressivism was shifted over to the Democratic Party, and they put that progressivism on steroids. And you'd be surprised at what happened thereafter in the Democratic Party.
No, what I'd like to know, though, is, everybody, we kind of enjoyed some benefits from being a world power. I mean, that's undeniable. I mean, right in the 1920s, after this First World War, we had, basically the world was our oyster, literally. And then the Second World War, we had a booming economy. And I actually had a discussion with people at U of M, when I was at U of M, and this girl I was talking to I was trying to say, well, look at all the people that died, because I have a real issue with saying that the Second World War was necessary. I think Roosevelt orchestrated events, FDR did, to actually get Japan to act the way they did.
No question about it.
But okay, when you say that, though, I'm like, and especially here, it's so entrenched that he was such a hero, such a legendary figure. Mm-hmm. And I said that, and the response was, well, look at all the wealth we created out of that. I was stunned. I mean, I was like, do you realize the human cost And there's a price to be paid. Yeah, we did make some great advancement in medicine because of the wars. And every war we've actually seen some great benefit from after this great tragedy. And I'm not a peacenik. I'm not a person who believes you should just let people run over you and kill you and not react. I'm not like that. But and maybe you and I will disagree on this because we never discussed this part. But I just think that these wars we've been fighting since the First World War, they always say they're fighting for our freedom. I can't see that actually in the First World War situation. Definitely wasn't fighting for our freedom. Second World War, possibly more. So maybe Korea and Vietnam, don't see where that was fighting for our freedom at whatsoever. I don't see these two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, being about our freedom. I really don't.
Right.
It was because they used the excuse because Saddam Hussein didn't respond like the UN wanted to within that time frame. We had to basically now act single-handedly, and where we had a coalition before, and we didn't have the UN's overwhelming support after we went back in again, and to go on attacks. I guess going after Afghanistan because that was a wide open territory for terrorist organizers, but to go after Iraq was just irrelevant to me, and I'm so tired of these law and order types. Well, they didn't follow the rules. Well, guess what? Now you're fighting a war that's protracted, and you've created the conditions to set up for a bigger disease called ISIL and ISIS or whatever to set up. And I just don't see where our troops are fighting for our freedom. They're fighting, and we're sending them there. We owe them a debt of gratitude for fighting this. But I don't see. Now, especially when they come back, they should be getting the support, not the illegals and the Muslim refugees. But I'd like to know where we went derailed at, and it seems like we slipped from that. At one time, people did have a serious understanding of our underpinnings, about what our country is about. Like Buchanan's book years ago, A Republic, Not an Empire. And people, basically, you talk to the average person, they don't see how that's even an issue because they were so brought up with this overreach that America's been engaging in. So, I mean, but my question to you basically is, can you see any real value to being a world power that's actually overwhelmingly beneficial to us, where we can say we could just totally disregard what we lost in the process?
As long as we have constituency, that an agency that is in fact grounded in a moral grounding point, or a grounding point that has to do with the values, the protection of the values that this country represents. And really, our position in the world is a very important one. We recognize that and respect it, and we employ it in ways in which it is useful and helpful and not injurious. Sometimes you can get so full of yourself that you think that every battle is your battle, and some battles that this country has fought were not only unnecessary but injurious to the welfare of and well-being of the nation, and also the well-being and welfare of the world. I mean, we not always, intervene on the side of justice, on the side of that which is right, and sometimes we made mistakes. But that's what politicians, politicians do. See, one of the things we have to think about in terms of this country is that it's because of its economic engine and the amount of wealth that it was able to accumulate through the kind of economic laissez-faire economics that it practiced in the 19th century. I know we want to call them robber barons, but that's just what the politicians want to label. The real robber barons are the politicians. But when we had these, before Atlas Shrugged, and before we had these politicians taking over the economy, we were a very wealthy nation. And what wealth does is that it puts money in the hands of politicians, who then began to employ things that would go on politically that would not go on if they did not have the money for it. I mean, that happens because of our economic, engine that was to the not secondary to any economic engine ever created in the world. I mean, we had more wealth than any country's ever had in the history of the planet. But when you put that kind of wealth, though, into unprincipled and unscrupulous, people, I'm talking about politicians here, who are the most unscrupulous persons in any society, and you give them power and you give them money, then that is a formula for disaster. And there's been a formula for disaster. What, John, you were just saying a few minutes ago, in terms of what they've done with the amount of wealth that was accumulated, they've done mischief making.
Okay, bringing this to that point, I don't know if you've heard of this, I don't know if I got the terms or the numbers right, but LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and his wife, basically wealthy people by some. They had some few thousands of dollars stuck away, but because after the escalation and involvement of our troops in Vietnam, and I've heard these from the hippies and some people, and I don't know the exact number, but they left the White House with around $17 million because LBJ's wife actually owned stock in the company that was awarded the contract to make the M16 rifle, which at that time had serious issues, caused deaths in the field, and basically some people that I remember hearing about said that the reason why he escalated our troop involvement there just to sell more units, more rifles, so he and his wife could benefit. And I don't know if you ever heard that, or did you ever hear that before yourself? Or?
Not that particular part of it, but I do understand the particulars of the America's entry into the war through the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that was passed by Congress without them knowing all of the facts, and they had no way of really doing the fact finding because they didn't have the apparatus to go in. They didn't have the apparatus to do that. Given what the president was able to do in terms of telling them what had happened, they had no way of saying otherwise, and he got them through this mirage he had created that the boats have been fired upon, American vessels have been fired upon in the Gulf of Tonkin, and through that, the rush to judgment was such that they ran in there and believed this man, who was, if anything, was a cosmic, politician, and he authorized the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, all of a sudden, we are now committing 500,000 troops to Vietnam, unnecessarily fighting a war. Now I can give the other side of that. I won't do it here, but there is another side. But politicians, I want to say on this point about the politicians. Politicians will always seek to expand their reach. That's been their history. There are no exceptions to it anywhere in history, and they will attempt at whatever starting point they're in. If you go back and look at the history, and I looked at the history through all of the different countries, just that particular question: what have they done once they've had power? And the accrual of power has always led to the attempt to accrue more power. And so when the purse strings are such that they are able to finance their what's the word for it? Their sense of grandeur. If they can finance their sense of grandeur, because they're all legends and they're all man, and they think they're greater than they actually are. I hear them all the time. There's a lot of fluff. They create jobs. They haven't created a job in the history of the planet.
I'd like to see. Besides that point that I brought about LBJ, that was what I heard when I was growing up. After the years. But I'd like to hear this too. Like if you're going on the point about under Obama or under President Bush, we had the job creation. And I just heard that today in a report, and I went, really? They went into every corporation boardroom, told them, hey, here's what you should market. Here's the service you should offer. Here's something you should launch. Do they do that? No. And I don't understand why we even permit people saying that. The only thing, and Tom Sumner said this one time, he said the only thing that a politician can do is give you the toolkit of the tax rates. What they're going to tax you for startup businesses, or they're going to allow you to discount or whatever. That's about it. Yeah. But other than that, I don't see how Obama, and if it does, why can't we say what he did to the small business person when he first got in office? You didn't build that, somebody else did. Well, right. You didn't create those jobs, somebody else did. On the floor each day, making those decisions, putting their necks on the line. You did not do anything. Yeah. And that's for any president.
Obama was going to give us shovel-ready jobs, and then he took the shovel. These politicians.
What do you use shovels for, though? What do you use for shovels for? You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
What they're spreading.
Digging us into anything. If they use a shovel, they used it to dig a deeper hole for the country. And when he came in, there was $10.6 trillion of indebtedness this country had borne and had been strapped with. And now he's been in there for going on 8 years. And I'll be the first one knocking on wood when that 8 years comes to a close. But the deficit now has almost doubled under this president. And so not only do we not get shovel-ready jobs, we got him digging us more into using a shovel and digging the country into more debt, which is impossible to pay off. And one day we're going to have a program on allpointstv.com on this program to talk about the indebtedness. And I'm going to be using this book right here that I brought to the studio. I won't get into it today, but I brought to the studio a book written by one of the great minds in the economic world, Murray Rothbard. And he has a book here that I'm finishing up called What Has Government Done to Our Money? And we could, I need to write a book, but my book will be a little bit differently titled. I'll be writing What Has the Government Done to Our Country?
You know, the thing is, too, I'd like to know why, and people talk about the minimum wage to be increased, and they say, it's time for these people to step up and pay their workers a living wage. But how come it's never addressed the role of taxation on the corporations getting the breaks and the person who is actually working every day and getting taxes taken out of them? Why isn't that ever addressed? I mean, if you stop the taxation, if you know that person's not going to make a certain amount of money, don't tax them, and don't even go through the process of it. You know that job's not going to pay enough to be on that. But now they send their money in, they have to send it back. That itself costs money. Okay? And I don't think, I've brought that up, and I've had these guys who think they're so knowledgeable, they roll their eyes, it doesn't cost that much. It does cost. You add it up. The taxation, but nobody addresses the role of taxation and how it impacts on the low-income earners.
Oh, my goodness. If they object to that, they don't have any understanding of economics. Because the assumption that they have then, if that is their belief, is that the government knows better what to do with someone else's earnings than what the person that earned the money knows what to do with the money. And the government, on the first tier of that interruption of the person being motivated to provide service, provide jobs, for example, the incentive for that is because there's a return to which the person benefits from that. So on the first tier, the downturn is when the government interferes with it. It de-incentivizes the productive effort, because if the government gets a benefit, then why would the person that produces the wealth in the first place want to continue to produce it if the confiscation of the wealth will go on through the confiscatory power of the state? So I mean, that's just the first tier. There's a lot of other things involved in it as well. But on the first level is the government coming in and confiscating wealth that it did not produce. Why would the person that produced it be incentivized to produce more wealth if the person that produced no wealth? That's what Ayn Rand was saying. I mean, it's really something when you think about it in a much wider lens. And the much wider lens would be that the person that are the producers have to get permission to produce from those who produce nothing. That's an economic contradiction. If the government is going to regulate production, then let's see what the government produces. So therefore, they are the Cadillac example of what that regulatory agency would do, because they are the beneficiaries of it themselves, and they're able to show the benefits of their regulatory mannerisms in the economic sphere. They're doing it in the public sphere, so they're applying it in the private. Okay, then let's see if they're then producing wealth in the public sphere. The fact is that they draw from the private enterprise, and without that, they would not have any resources to do the things that they do. And one of the downsides of this country being the most productive economic engine the world has ever seen is that by doing that, by the government finding a way to in fact reach into that productive effort and confiscate that wealth, was allowed them to do the things that John's talking about. So we have to understand something here. We have to understand that from the beginning and inception of this country's history, the fight has been one of restricting the government's largesse in this country and around the world. And the way that they restricted it, the frames I'm talking about here, because these persons were very prescient, and they understood. These people were not lightweights. And I agree with Ayn Rand in her book called The New Intellectuals, where she says, I think it's on page 8 of that book. I'm pretty sure it's on page 8 of that book, where she says that that the framers were the first intellectuals, and so far the last. Now you can claim otherwise that you listen to these intellectuals today, but I don't see it. I see a lot of persons that are able to, they don't create new information. What they do is they are regurgitators.
I'd like to know this. Is there any other country that started up after ours, writing their constitution or the constitution of their country, do they have it set up a provision for setting up patent offices? So, I mean, that's what it shows, that they were intellectual. And see, the thing is, you have a tendency in the academic setting to poo-poo and look down upon the entrepreneur, the businessman, because it's considered crassness.
You made a very good point.
And they have a tendency to, and that's what Ayn Rand pointed out, and that's the reason why Ayn Rand's never accepted amongst academic circles.
Right. Because I'll tell you who will be accepted, John Maynard Keynes, because that big government idea of, just the Keynesian view is government, we can become wealthy by just printing money. I wish I had come here to read from this book, because I could read you some things in this book here that just in a few places in this book contradict everything and countermands everything that John Maynard Keynes ever wrote. And Rothbard writes in this book right here that which puts a damper on what Keynes wrote. I don't care how voluminous he wrote. This right here, this small book here, puts a damper on everything that John Maynard Keynes said or had to say in economics. And a lot of where we are right now is because of John Maynard Keynes. Keynes is nonsense. But when you give politicians money and you put enough money in the coffers, then they are like a bull in a china in a china shop, or just a kid in a candy store. That's how they are. If you put anything in their hands that allow them to expand upon their reach, it will be put to that use. And it may start out, this country started out with a great experiment. And the framers had a great idea about how they had to make sure, they tried their best to make sure that this country would not turn into what they had seen in history, where politicians are going out of control. There has not been one country, not one. I know you read Plato's Republic. I read it also in undergraduate school. And this idea of there are going to be philosopher kings, these persons that really have the benevolent interests of the public at large, that's at heart, that's what they intend to do. I understand that that's the utopian vision. But in terms of how it is played out in history, has been the very opposite of that. And so they are not going to be any philosopher kings, and all you can do, because they are endowed with power, is to in fact restrict how it can be exercised. And you do that by what the framers try to do. You try to disperse it. You try to have it checked in each corridor where power is being exhibited. You try to check it within their corridor so it cannot reach over into another corridor. You divide it up into different corridors and have each corridor having a certain amount of power to which it's jealous of, and will now allow any encroachment within the reach of where that power is exercised. And that was the intention on that level. And then the not only the separation of powers, but the check and balance system, and then the monetary aspect, which we have not looked at, and the disaggregation of power on different levels, the federal level and then state level, things of that sort, which they were very prescient in trying to say, okay, we know that the historical example and human experience has been power to grow itself. Never to be satisfied with the reach that it had the day before, but want to have more reach in the days to come. And they tried to restrict that because they saw what I see. I've said that this also that question, and these were persons that were intellectuals. I'm trying to find someone today that matches up with what they wrote. I mean, look, 1776, Adam Smith wrote the book called The Wealth of Nations. Can I get an economist, somebody that's not, I'm make it fair, somebody that's not in the Mises, school, not in the Austrian school of economics. Can I get anybody that has written anything like The Wealth of Nations, written by Adam Smith, that was written in 1776? Can I get somebody to write something on the same level? And that was in the 18th century. These were not lightweights. Or give me some of these people that's writing philosophy that writing philosophy like they did back in the time of John Locke, and somebody that had, and some of the ones that John talks about on the air sometimes. Give me those persons today. Where would we find them? They were trying. What the framers were doing was trying to construct something that would bring about a new experiment in history, something that the world had never seen before. I mean, I remember reading back in the time when I was in college. I did a lot of reading, by the way, before I got to college. So I got to college, I got, quite frankly, I'm not bragging, but quite frankly, for my first year in college, I shouldn't have paid for. Maybe the last three years too. But I was always a reader. So by the time I got to college, I was 17 years old. I think I was the youngest person in that class, and I couldn't even get a girlfriend because all the girlfriends from the time in the class I was in, they always were older, and plus I wasn't attracted. I started playing baseball. That was my junior year. By the time it was too late. But in my freshman year, I had done a lot of reading, and by the time I got to college, I was, I had read all these I read all the classics. So anyway, to make this long story short, I was kind of, looking at history in a long range view. I was studying a lot, reading a lot of history. A lot of it I was reading history even when I was reading the comic books, because I was reading the classics, Count of Monte Cristo, by the Three Musketeers writer, the Dumas family, Alexander Dumas Pare, and his brother Alexander and his father, I should say, Alexander Dumas Fields. I've been reading their stuff, in high school. So I had kind of gone back into the historical record. I didn't ask the right questions though. I was just reading it because to me it was a good story to know. I didn't ask the right questions in reading it, but I began to ask the right questions later on, because I already had read the history, so I now had to put the right questions in place to see what history was explaining to me. And the right question was, why did that happen? And why did it happen during the time that it happened? And why did it happen to those particular individuals through which it played out? And when I began to ask the right questions, I began to see something in history that was I guess you have to say, it was a veil of history in terms of unless you ask the right question, history does not give you the right answers. And I was reading it to regurgitate the facts, but when I began to read it to answer the questions I had, then I began to understand a lot better. And one of the questions I had, quite frankly, was the question of why is it that these politicians are acting the way they're acting throughout history. There had been no exception to it. I didn't see the benevolent philosophers, the philosopher kings that Plato wrote about in the Republic. I didn't see that. What I kept seeing was these people that Ayn Rand wrote about, which was Attila. I kept seeing them. In fact, she was talking about there were two historical persons that were playing on the stage of history from the beginning up until the 19th century. And those two individuals were Attila, the man of force, that'd be the politicians, and the amount of people that put around him who manifest his ideas through force, because he represents force. And that's where you get the army and all of those things around him, and all these agencies around him to insulate him from any kind of attack. He arms people around him because he is a man of force and he uses force.
Most people, they got this foggy, overly sentimentalized thing about kings and queens and how great they were. They don't understand the knights that they were in their ploy were basically like mobsters, thugs. That's what they were. Okay, I mean, everybody wants to have this legendary, they're such benevolent people. Okay, they still levied taxes on you. They took your children from wars that you didn't enjoy any benefit from and if they didn't do a good enough job, you got invaded by the neighbor. Okay, so I mean, they got this overly sentimentalized view of a king and a queen, and that terminology. And when I hear that, it's like that's just like bizarre for me. Like what a great king. Well, they're thugs. That's all they are. It's thugs.
John, that's not a word. See, a politician and a king and any of that. it's a four-letter word. The four-letter word is thug, and they have never been different. And so this idea, and in fact, I was getting ready to say this earlier, that in the book written by C.L.R. James, this book was written in 1939, called The Black Jacobins. He talks about, it's a very good book, by the way, one of the best books, one of the 20 best books I think that's ever been written. I don't think you can top this book in terms of writing anything about the Haitian revolution that occurred as a spinoff of the American Revolution. There were two revolutions that were spinoffs of the American Revolution. One was the French Revolution that took place 13 years after the launching of the American Revolution in 1776. In 1789, you have the French Revolution. And then in 91, based upon the French Revolution, you have the Ogie and Giovannis and others that went to France asking for some of that liberty that they were fighting for over there. They wanted some of it in the colony, in the most wealthy colony that France had, which was Haiti, and France was not willing to give it to them. And Napoleon certainly was going to stand in the gap and tell them that that's not really, that's not for you, this is over here. And they thought that that was not reconcilable with the ideals of the French Revolution of equality, liberty, and fraternity, and they just thought that that was not going to be acceptable. Not today, not tomorrow. It didn't sit too well on their stomach on Friday. So, so they stood up against it, and in that revolution, you see politicians again, you know, standing outside of the boundaries, because they had a revolution in Haiti. And the revolution in Haiti was for these ideals. I mean, look at what they're fighting for. They're fighting for restriction of power, and we want to limit, you know, the power that's being excessively used, and so on and so forth. Guess what they did when they got in power themselves? Go read about it in Charles Adams's book. Adams got a good book out also.
Yeah, because I mean, the Bolsheviks did that years later. They took power because the Tsar was so oppressive, allegedly, and they're like million times more oppressive and killed millions more people.
Happens.
I mean, it seems like if you're really motivated of trying to prevent people from suffering, I think you should have a kind of like, we can't go this only though so far. But it never seems to be the case. They don't have these governing principles that prevent them from going to extremes.
You're going to have to do what Jefferson talked about, and that is you got to chain them down. You know, a person went to Thomas Jefferson and said that he wanted to find someone that could fill the role that would fulfill the vision that they had that's found in the Declaration of Independence. And he went to Thomas Jefferson, who became the third president of the United States after they ushered out of office John Adams, who became another monstrosity in office after having been on the committee to write the Declaration of Independence. He's one of the 5 persons that helped to bring it into a workable form. Then, of course, it was revised and edited by the Continental Congress, but they were the ones that put the clothes on it. And then the refining of it would be something later on through netting out some of the excesses and things that they took out of the larger document, made it more concise. But, you know, Thomas Jefferson was asked a question because they saw that this vision was being lost. And Jefferson was the third president. They saw his Adams. Look what Adams did. That over here is not being so much in the purview of some things that Thomas Jefferson did, although he did do some things that corrected Adams's excesses, but he had some excesses of his own. And this one person came to Jefferson and said that, who can we get after you leave office that would be someone that would, you know, further refine this ideal? And Jefferson said to him, "Do not come to me, talk to me about men, but talk to me about chaining men down underneath the Constitution." And that's what the framers attempted to do. As long as that was working on a couple of cylinders, one of which was the purse strings, then it worked fairly well up to a certain point. But you see, there was a tiller, still a tiller. All the politicians are a tiller. And there are no exceptions. I'm sorry. There are never going to be any exceptions. See, because I keep saying this over and over again, and I do think it's something that the other, the scholars, let's call them scholars. I don't call them that off the air. I'll call them scholars on the air. But what the scholars need to look at is get away from Lord Acton's comment that power tends to corrupt. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. That, in fact, the sentence is grammatically incorrect. I've corrected that in the past, but it's grammatically incorrect. 10, and then the word 10 is in the first part of the sentence, but not in the second part of the sentence. So it's grammatically, it's not profound grammatically. But it's also incorrect. Because it's not power that's corrupting influences. It's the kind of people that pursue power. We've not looked at those that don't pursue power. The people that don't pursue power are much more virtuous than the people that pursue power. And those that pursue power, they don't pursue power for virtuous reasons. They may claim that they are. And by the way, the virtuous reasons are what they state in their platform and in their running for office and their campaign slogans. That's the virtues. I mean, the virtue is in what they say, not what they do.
Well, what is it said on Facebook? They had that meme going out that some famous person said that, I think it was H.L. Mencken, the desire to change the world actually is a not so secret, is a secretive desire to control it. And that's what it is. I mean, let's face it, we all have, I would do this if there's some things we would do, there's some things we wouldn't touch. But let's face it, getting people who don't pursue power is impossible to get them to go through the process to get elected or to get into office.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have it just falling into, I mean, the only person I could see that actually had somewhat of that, and I don't like saying this, but it was because he was a party I don't really appreciate, but would be Harry S. Truman. He was basically, he became president by the fact that FDR died in office. He was not a person who was this extraordinary rich individual or successful individual. He basically happy easily went into it, and he became the most powerful person in the world at that time.
Yeah.
And so, but he was the only person I could point out to who would actually have very humble origins and didn't have this megalomaniac viewpoint of himself. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the only person. He's a Democrat, so that's a virtue I think that he possessed.
I don't have a problem saying the truth. I don't care what party they belong to, and if they did some things that we can say were substantive and were principled. We have to say that, and if we say other than that, we're being as unprincipled as the ones we're trying to critique. You know, one of the things that I try to do, my whole thing is this: that I'm gonna say what I think is the truth, and I can't be guided by how people will take it. And today, by the way, on my post, if they didn't like what I said in parts 1 and 2 of this 3-part series I just finished today, if they didn't like parts 1 and 2, they certainly not going to like part 3 because I was even more provocative at that time. But I'm trying to push the envelope, and I really can't care about how it is received or who doesn't like it. In fact, that doesn't even enter into what I have to say. But back to these politicians, there's no virtue in the reasons why they're running. They're not running, and this is one of the things that I think was pointed out in 2016 during this race. We can see all the ones that are opposing this outsider. Donald Trump is being opposed by the whole world. As far as the landscape here in this country is concerned, everybody is in opposition to this man coming in because he's an unknown quantity. And there's a certain way in which the discourse and the politics of this country plays out, and we don't know what this guy brings to the table. He's unknown in that sense, but we know what we can expect from Democrats and Republicans, because they are the flip side of the same folks. That's why nothing changes in Washington. It doesn't matter whether you elect a Democrat or Republican, one, except the speed in which they're going down the same road. That doesn't make you believe that they're not, in fact, advancing the same cause. I mean, people get confused. They're very crafty. People get confused thinking that because the rhetoric is different, that the course, that the path that they're on is different because the discourse is different. One talks out of this side of the mouth, and the other talk at the right side of the mouth. And but let's look and see if the actions are different. The actions are not one iota different. They are speaking out of different sides of different corners of their mouth. But in terms of what they're practicing, it's the same thing. There's only one party in the United States. And we see examples of it now in terms of it coming out because they they had to come from behind the woodwork. Because they had to come out and get rid of the facade and protect the one party interest in this country. And that's what they're doing. And I hope the American people will be smart enough to understand what they're dealing with these politicians. Maybe you have not studied it as much. In fact, I know you haven't studied as much as I've studied in terms of going back and reading history by reading it with this question in mind. Who are these people? That's the question I began to ask. And I had to go back over a lot of my books that I had read, but I had to go back and ask this question: who are these people? And once I raised that question, I was able now to read the history and read it with that question in mind, and I know who we are now. They are a gang who have endowed themselves with political power. And they are just as much a thug group, as any thugs out on the street. In fact, Lew Rockwell has made this comment. I think he made it last year. Lew Rockwell, who's over the Mises Institute, said that the government in Washington is more dangerous than ISIS. And he calls them what they are. He calls them thugs. He's from Auburn University, so he can. This is not Harvard University. I don't know if he would be allowed to work at Harvard University because he is a conservative voice, and you'd be surprised at how they keep talking about they want diversity. I tell you what they don't want. They don't want no Republicans in there. They want diversity. They don't want the conservatives. And when they say they want diversity, ask them how many conservatives are there in the sociology department or the history department, political science department. Carol Swain, you're exceptional down there at Vanderbilt, and I have a lot of admiration for you, but I know exactly where you are. You're out there as a voice in the wind at Vanderbilt, and Walter Williams, you're a voice in the wind. Not as much in the wind in the department where you are, but it's certainly in that university where you are, George Mason University. These are, liberal plantations, academic plantations for the liberal point of view, where they incubate that view and then put it out here in society, and then we have these politicians picking up on it, and then they go into the political arena and they control power, and we're being run by the left, and the landscape in this country is left, and that's what this fight is about, to get this power out of the hands of these crooked gang members. By that I mean, and I'm up front and saying it, these politicians. And until we do that, quite frankly, then putting this country on a different course is not only impossible, it's unthinkable. They'll say it cannot happen. And there are a lot of things I could say about that. I will be talking about it in the future, because I'll be talking about this extensively as we go toward November the 8th, because I think this is it. We don't even have a choice. You may think we have a choice. We don't have a choice. This country has got to elect Donald Trump. I'm not saying that's the optimal, choice or the best choice in the world or any of that. I'm saying it's the only choice you have in this election. Now, since there are more than one person running, it may not be that choice is made. And I will tell you ahead of time, up front and personal, on the QT and running, is that if that choice is not made, then the doom is in fact a certainty. Because that's where we are right now. The progressives have been at this a long time, and I went back and asked these questions about these politicians. Who are these people? And when I saw them as being is, first of all, they are power crazed, and then with Roosevelt they became progressives, which means they're carrying some of the Marxian, view of things, where it's the state, and so they're statists and they're collectivists, and we're now at the end of a journey they started under Theodore Roosevelt, switched over to the Democrats under Woodrow Wilson, and now we have it on steroids under the under Obama, who is a descendant of that idea. We think Obama came out of nowhere. Obama came out of Harvard University. Give me a break. This man came out of the radical left. And the idea he came out of nowhere, he came from somewhere. But it's nowhere that you want to be. And nowhere the country needs to be. And that's this man's, background. And today when I wrote about these politicians, I wrote about him too. And I have my critics out there, and they think they're going to shut me up. And give me a break. You can't shut me up. Not on this side of the planet. And I mean, it's not going to happen. And so you're just wasting your time. And plus, you're not qualified. And they get mad. I tell them that and they make them mad because they know it's true. But we got to be honest about what's happening right now. And we're at the edges. We are at the peripheral edges of a cliff. And these progressives, and that's in both parties, but more so in the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. But don't forget, the Republican Party is the one which started this process. And so it is more extreme in one party than it is in the other. But don't forget, the foundation point is not the party where it's more extreme. I mean, I was getting ready to say earlier, that during the Depression, you saw the same thing. I mean, Roosevelt took the government's policies instituted under Hoover and put it on steroids. But the Great Depression started to be a Great Depression under Herbert Hoover, the Republican. It was passed off to this person chopping at the bits that continued down the road that Herbert Hoover started. Roosevelt didn't start this. He continued it. And what would have ended as just another downturn, which we've had many of those, used to call them panics. Nobody ever called, we never had the word depression used to enter the downturns in this country until 1929. And the reason for that is very clear, isn't it? There's no reason to talk about it being a Great Depression or a depression. Go try to find the word depression used with any of the downturns in this country before the politicians got involved in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because in 1913 they adopted the income tax and all that stuff, right, and the taxation rates and all that. And then, then after that we had how many, 2 or 3 or 4 recessions, and then the Great Depression, and
Every 5 years.
Because it's like years. The simple things I look at it as an analogy is. It's basically about a human and an isolated population. The humans, like, if they're outside of disease population, they're insulated and isolated from that disease. When everything is like all tied together, it's systemic. It runs rapidly through it, and that's exactly what they guaranteed happening when they put it under more control of the government, under the control, more of the economic, control in the hands of the government.
As long as this economy is in the hands of the government, I can tell you right now, the downward spiral of this country and the tyranny that it will bring about because of the downward spiral will continue. And we are on the road that F.A. Hyatt wrote about in 1944 in his book called The Road to Serfdom. We are on that road. In fact, it's no longer a road, it's a superhighway. And he wrote about that in 1944. He wrote about it during the last year of Roosevelt's life. Roosevelt died in 1945 after being elected 4 times to the presidency because he would not leave. He's a politician, so he wanted more power. He would not leave the office, although the president was there all the time up until 1940. He ran in 1932, ran in 1936, ran in 1940, ran again in 1944. And that had never happened before. But that's what happens with politicians. I'm just telling you that with politicians, you're going to get that kind of result. And history verifies and validates that claim. And there's no refutation in history that invalidates it. That's just been what has happened. And I didn't understand that until I went back to find out that question, why? When I started asking the question why, I began to see why. And Lord Acton was wrong. It's not power, it's the politicians. And the politicians, the people who are politicians, that's the problem. And that's what the framers tried to restrict. Those persons who pursue power, who are politicians, have to be restricted. They have to be restrained. And if they're not restrained, you get this result right here. See, I said at the beginning of the program, and I do admit this. I do agree. I admit this openly. I'm going to do everything I can to get Donald Trump elected president of the United States. I'm going to do everything I can to bring that result about. I'm not going to apologize for it. I do not think that Donald Trump is an ideal candidate. That is beside the point. I don't get distracted about he is now getting ready, maybe Wednesday, to refine his views on immigration. I know that he's made some statements that he's now said he apologizes for, and those types of things. I don't get, that is all, look, those are all sidebar, conversation. I don't get sidetracked. That's immaterial. The focus is clear. We have an outsider running against a politician. That right there closes the case. You can say what you want to. But anytime you got a choice of a politician who's been in the lodges for 40 years, as this woman Hillary Clinton has done, and you got a person who never held elective office, there is no decision to make. History says it. Now, once he gets in there, it does not mean that I'm going to turn, what's that song by Chapman? I'm going to turn my back around. That's a Tracy Chapman song. I'm not going to turn my back around and say that we don't need to look now because the person that we are, in fact, that I support got in there. And I do think, I know what you're going to say about it because you're reading these fallacious polls. You should go on YouTube and read some of the other things that you don't get through the alphabet soup cable stations and the cover up of those real poll numbers. Because I tell you this, those polls got to be wrong. You see, I got to believe that based upon what my lying eyes are saying to me, and also I got to see it because I refuse to believe this country has gone over the cliff intellectually to that extent, because if they have, it's already over. If you can elect a known criminal who goes in there with a criminal, background, and everybody knows it, and they elect it and go in there, then this is already over and cannot be saved. There's no choice to be made in 2016 November, not because of Donald Trump, but because of this politician who has a track record that's already one in which the nation has been injured, and until we, in fact, go there and do the right thing, there's only one right thing to do here, and that's to turn this person back, turn this progressive movement back. That's the only choice you have in 2016. Okay, we got to get out of here because we could go on and on and on, and then you're going to turn us off and say that you won't be here next week, and we don't want that. We've got to have you here every week. Because I'm just like Shania, because we get mad when you're not here. We'll be taking roll. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.